and they hit me with a couple of cybersecurity items for today's presentation because I am presenting outside of my normal realm. But a lot of what I'm presenting on today is sort of my tips and techniques, things I've been studying over the past couple of years, and really trying to dissolve the hype around where AI is and where we are sort of in 2026 moving forward. So starting off with kind of, I think, we've had this hype bubble that's kept going for the past couple of years. And we don't really see that stopping, but in a way, I think there's been some sort of actuals of where we've arrived at in terms of that people have started to see value in what they've delivered, and other places that have put mass investment into their AI programs are starting to see that pay off. And so you see, those continued headlines, and I think everyone has become almost a little fatigued by them. Like, AI tends to dominate what we see in the headlines, and what we see from the actual and the projected from those expected results. Let's see. Next slide, please. So looking at the agenda today, I just discovered, what we are from the hype side. I want to help people look at their workflow and see where you can make a noticeable difference. I think that's going to be the big difference in between just simple prompting. You're asking questions into really uncovering the tools for AI and where we can go from here. A lot of what I discussed today is going to be focused on Google Gemini. I think they're really giving ChatGPT and Anthropic a run for the money, and we'll dive into that more. And really, I want you to leave today with skills that you could take to your team or your manager and say, this could make a difference in what we do. This could be more efficient. Next slide. So I dove into some research about where we are with hype, and looked at some McKinsey studies and Gartner diagrams, which we'll get to next, of where we are on the hype scale, that there is this sort of, parabolic ladder of all technologies. If you think of the cassette tape, if you think of, CDs to DVDs, where we kind of go through the trough and where we come down. And so I think we can see that adoption is high, but that we're still so far from where we want to be. And we'll dive into more of that. On the second part, in looking at demonstration integration, like I work on an integration team through MuleSoft. If you work on the API side, you might be familiar with their product, but really integration is how a lot of these pieces connect. The puzzle of AI to the puzzle of workflow. And finally, just looking at that actuals per projected. If you come to this from a finance or accounting background and you're used to operating in an environment of, where are we and where do we want to be? And we can see that from where we were a year ago, thinking AI is going to take all of our jobs and we're going to be at this sort of, totally robotic humanoid level of experience on humanity. We are far from that. Next slide. So just referring, this is Gartner. They're a leader, in case you're not familiar with some of their infographics and just IT information in general. And I chose this slide. You can kind of pick out some of the finer print that, AGI is in there in terms of a lot of the companies, OpenAI, et cetera. They sort of wave the magic wand of what AGI is going to be. And that's kind of looked at as, the ultimate, human AI experience. And we're approaching that, but still a long ways off in terms of, seeing that sort of what at times is, ultimate AI productivity. Other people see it from sort of a doomsday side. And, how do we balance that for the future? So we've got a couple other things on there as well. Some of them were just kind of newer buzzwords. I even had to look up augmented connected workforce. Basically, if you think of kind of a fast food restaurant type situation where everything is connected. So once again, it's sort of, here's where we're predicting things to go for 2025, 2026, and where are we really at on that scale? Next slide. So to wrap up this mini section, and this is just another final Gartner graphic of what are trends moving forward. Looking at more architecture, that your data architecture and reference architecture is really going to determine where data integrity and your language models and machine learning is going to come from, and sort of these sort of future roles. So you can look at what's coming down the pipeline for from the cybersecurity side, from the compliance side. If you work on a governmental side and you're subjected to very strict compliance and stringent ordinances, then that's not going away anytime soon. So how we get there, I think, is the question in terms of integrated workflows and more agentic AI. Next slide, please. So we've seen Jensen Huang of NVIDIA in the headlines, and he had a quote as I was researching this last night that stated, if you look at the difference between the US versus China, that in the US, 20% of people see AI as creating good and creating value, whereas in China, it's seen as 80%. And I think another just key takeaway I've really started to soak up, and something you can take back to your teams, is how do you take what's in the headlines versus how do you start communication across teams, across agencies? Throughout the past probably 4 or 5 months, as I've taken on my projects and my use cases, I have literally just been asking people across our enterprise, do you have anything I can work on? Do you have any areas that you have not been able to crack? And that has provided some significant use cases, which I'll get to later. One of the buzzwords as I was researching this even more last night, because this all changes so quick. The funny thing about this presentation is I started creating it about 2 months ago, and then looking at it again yesterday, there was already so much that had changed that I had to almost rewrite a lot of it and just update it to what has become current. And so I thought this was a cool word and phrase, geopatriation, in terms of just, so much is going on in our world right now, more than ever, I feel, in terms of countries' geopolitical strategy. So geopatriation involves basically taking your data away from the cloud, away from cloud infrastructure, and creating, local areas, local data centers, local access for it. So I think there's probably a lot more of this going on than we realize, but I thought it was something that played into what we're seeing and what we should consider. Go ahead, next slide. So if you look at the major players out there right now, obviously ChatGPT has hit the ground running the hardest, but it is my personal opinion that Google Gemini really is swinging for the fences the hardest right now in terms of an integrated system where it's multiple models, multiple avenues of gems, of Nano Banana, which is photo editing, of Notebook LM, which we're going to dive into, and of anti-gravity. And so basically, you're just seeing a really interesting situation of how all of these programs are working together at once. So if you come back to the question about LLMs and, is it, that's large language models, in case you're not familiar with that acronym daily, of just how predictive text and natural language processing has evolved to where it is today. And as I discussed earlier, you'll see that phrase AGI, or artificial general intelligence, as sort of being the end all be all, kind of the carrot in the sky, if you will, of the major companies. And how do we get to that in between? And so really focusing on, what are other avenues throughout that pathway, throughout machine learning. I mean, if you see the phrase machine learning, that's really machine learning and neural networks were the birthplace of AI. It's kind of like AI has been rebranded as, the sports car, whereas machine learning might have been that initial, Shelby Mustang that was first out of the gate and had been at it for years. And we'll get to that here in a second too, of what the timeline has been. Next slide, please. I think looking at that sort of picture between actuals and projected, going back a year ago, there came some staunch studies that 95% of businesses said they had zero value in AI. I'd like to think that's gone down a little bit, especially in the past 4 to 5 months. Just as models have developed, as accuracy has developed, and as hallucinations have gone down as well. It is still not the fix, but it's still inching towards more, efficiency, and once again, getting away that fear of, instead of losing your job to AI, you're going to use your job to AI to use it as a tool. Next slide. So part of this document, I didn't feel the need to put the whole chart. It came out last fall, I believe, by Forbes or Fortune, of the circular flow of money. And I put just kind of a hint in the bottom of it, and thinking that there has been this bubble talk of, is this the same as 2008? Is it the same as the dot-com? And I think we're in a different period, because those periods of, hyper growth and then economic crash, were driven by a number of other factors. I think more the dot-com bust and burst is similar to what AI, if something were to happen, could be, where you sort of have a repricing and a regeneration, and not this total economic chaos, which I think dominated the markets for a while and dominated the headlines the past couple months. That as the stock market kept hitting all-time highs, and you kept seeing these multi-million dollar deals go down, people were really starting to wonder, will this pop at some point? Next slide. So if you look at that and referencing where ChatGPT was on the timeline, dating back to early days of neural networks and machine learning, I think from a technology standpoint, when we started to see predictive text on our phones, or typing an email out, that was natural language processing at work. And we, human adaptation started to come along more, that, you were getting a little bit of AI without ever noticing it. So, I mean, as it has become more and more a part of our lives, I think people and the adoption rate has been overall successful. You see this occasional resistance to society, people going back to flip phones. People don't want to be a part of larger big tech generation, and that will probably continue, but at a smaller scale. Next slide. All right, so finishing up on what was sort of a macroeconomic and global overview, and looking to how do you start to implement this within your teams? How do you say to your supervisor or your CISO office, like, let's have the conversation? What sort of limits can I operate in? If you're a small to medium-sized business, you operate on your own, it's important to have guardrails up to protect your data. And usually by doing that is with more paid models, that the free models are sometimes exposing your data to models to being trained on. And so just recognize that if you're trying something for free, you are the product, you are a part of the system that will be commoditized. So I found the quote and I put it in here, of turning compliance into strategy. So if you have to have that conversation with your CISO office, and I think you look at it from a standpoint of AI readiness, of, are we ready to do this? Are we ready to take our 10K, 10Q financial data and try to manipulate in a way where we'll get the best results? And so I strongly encourage to have those tough conversations with your teams and with your security managers, and find a solution moving forward. Next slide. So here's a framework as we start to dive in this more, whether you're new to prompting and prompt engineering context area, or you feel you have a good foothold on it. I really use this as a basics to begin to teach people how to compose proper prompting and do it really starting singular, one prompt at a time. If you've ever written a user story from agile development, I think you can relate to the format of, as a speaker, I want to be able to communicate to my crowd. As a systems engineer, I want to be able to design effective databases. And starting with that sort of role and actor, and then adding any details, followed by the format. Like I always tell people to think of this as a chef in a kitchen, that you're the chef, you've got a certain amount of a recipe, you know what your ingredients are, and you want it to come out a certain way. And then, by the way, your wife is gluten free. So you have to put constraints on your output and how you want things to come out. And it is sort of a trial and error thing at times. And I just encourage people to start from a singular side, but as these models and as these frameworks get so much more powerful, you can literally throw so much data at them that it's boggling to the mind. I think in Notebook LM, you can put up to 50 to 80 pieces, 80 links, 80 YouTube um, videos, 80 PDFs, documents, Google Drive notes, etc., all in one prompt and query. And so if you leave here with another piece of advice, unsolicited as well from me, but a personal favorite, is just try to break AI at times. Try to throw whatever you can at it and see what it does. I mean, there's just, for the most part, you can take chips away for a while. Like last night, I was using Nano Banana and Notebook LM to build out some use cases. And it's just insane that the amount of information you can put at it. Next slide. So here's another tip that I want to give to you if you've never heard of this or you're new to it and you're thinking, okay, how do I start to look at my workflow? How do I start to diagram my workflow? And one incredibly easy way to do that is with Mermaid code. Even if you've never written a line of code before, you don't need to know much how. It's put into a very easy syntax, but the benefit is Mermaid code will create diagrams for you in seconds. And there are a lot of tutorials from 3 to 5 minutes on how to do this. I look at it as a personal example of you can go into a meeting, you can have meeting notes summarized and say you want to create just a simple diagram of workflow on your team or an entity relationship diagram or data flow. And within 15 minutes of leaving a meeting, you can have a draft of that ready. You can pass that back to a team. You can put that in a status report. But I think it's incredibly powerful to take what you have, take what you've just heard, have it transcribed in a meeting, and being able to easily turn it into a diagram that is editable and shareable, within minutes. Next slide. So some of you today might be coming from the public safety side. I know I've been working with public safety and other avenues in the past fall, and I wanted to use what we are experiencing from the wildfire side as a good example of AI as well as public and private sector coming together. So this photograph here is from Colorado. It's called the East Troublesome Fire. I'm fortunate because one of my good friends is actually one of the foremost wildfire photographers in the US right now. He was on the scene in Malibu and Palisades last year and has gone from just kind of out of film school making small videos to being at the front lines with National Geographic and PBS, other documentarians, really photographing this and showcasing it for the world to see and learn from. So this fire here was, at the time, the fastest moving wildfire ever recorded in US history. I think somewhere around 30 miles an hour. And that was outside of Grand Lake, Granby, Colorado. Next slide. So if you look at from the side how AI is coming into this, we have Esri, which is pretty much one of the premier geographic, geoinformation system software and platforms. If you've ever worked in other um, owners of ArcGIS, but sort of at the top tier of GIS and geographic information systems. And so they have been working with the University of California, San Diego, past year, and especially since the Palisade fires, on integrating live feeds, integrating cameras. I think now they have 1,600 cameras throughout California. So if you're in California or anywhere in the world, you can log on and see how, is there a threat to your neighborhood? Is there a threat somewhere else? Or just seeing what nature looks like. So this is the area that we live in, of having real-time, high definition cameras that also integrate with geographic software. And so coming back to the integration side of, okay, I'm already a city planner or highway safety or law enforcement. I'm looking at areas that could be a potential fire risk that we want to integrate into traffic safety plans. This is just, starting to move the needle even further for traffic safety, for public safety, and for wildfire awareness. So that is one major product. So if you look at, this is just kind of, I thought, an interesting detail of how wildfire detection works. It comes back to machine learning, that a camera is focused on a natural setting. It's trained on what a forest looks like, what the ground looks like, what a light pole looks like, etc. Cars moving by. So at the minute it starts to detect other colors, there could be other heat patterns as well. That is going to trigger an alert system. It could be from a stationary camera, it could be from a drone, it could be from a camera in your car. And I think as we move forward with technology, we're seeing cars get a lot smarter. Motorcycles, I think, are going to have a ways to go in terms of catching up with actual harm to humans, but our vehicles are getting smarter, telling us, is our car in front of us? Is the road icy? And I think the Internet of Things, along with AI, you're going to see vehicles starting to talk to each other more than ever. If there's a wrong way driver coming down the road in the coming years, you might be alerted to that on your phone, and maybe on your heads up display in your vehicle, seconds after it happens. And so really the ultimate goal from public safety, from Department of Transportation's, of how do we keep fatalities down? How do we keep people safe? So lots of cool things coming down the pipeline for that. I think I have one more example of fire. Next slide, please. So yeah, this was actually just released a couple days ago, and this is what going back to, as I was looking at my presentation from 2 months ago, and there's so much cool stuff. I mean, I spent a couple hours literally just researching and including all this last night. A partnership with Ring Camera and Watch Duty. Watch Duty has been a crowdsourced fire app, not AI or machine learning based, but basically very comprehensive for those near or in wildfire areas. And they teamed up with Ring, who I believe is owned by Amazon and AWS, but just to create a network integration of how to, we already have all these cameras out there, and probably more than we even want to think about or know about, but how do we use these for civic good? And so just another way AI is coming into our lives for the positive. One more slide. And I think our last bet is back to public safety, from people who are affected by the fire in Lahaina, of, how do you get information back to the public? How do you, if you have automated traffic management systems, which are seen as kind of the boards over interstates and other areas and high traffic areas, how can you take crowdsourced information? How can you take information from cameras, whether in a car or on a drone, and get it back to people as fast and accurately as possible? So I can only imagine being on an island, and just the amount of stress and chaos that could provide, and hopefully AI can help with that in the future. Next slide. All right, so I want to dive into a couple case studies and just give you some examples of what you can take away with today. The first of all being, I built a tool last year to help with RFI and RFP, request for information, request for a purchase. And so these are areas in the procurement ladder. If you're looking at buying a new product, they're just looking at what vendors are out there. When I did this last fall, it was more on a singular scale of I would have to take each product and put it through, a chat GPT, a Gemini, etc. So at the top bar too, you can sort of see I have criteria for what I wanted to see out of it. So if I have a stack of 15 RFPs and I have 12 things that I want to vote on, I can list those in. And then instead of me having to read 15 RFPs, I can focus on the four that I want to. And that, I know that are going to pass my voting criteria and are the best for my firm or enterprise. And so doing that last fall compared to now with the newer models, you can essentially load all those in at once rather than doing prompt by prompt. So whether that's in chat, when any of the major models, you can upload all the documents, set limits and criteria for what you want it to find and to vote on essentially, and then have it create an output for you. So if you think back to the slide a couple parts ago, similar to user stories of, as an RFP reader, I want to make sure that these RFPs, contain all criteria needed, and please create a diagram output for our team to vote on. So I would say that's an easy to medium attempt to in terms of difficulty and the amount of information that you have. The thing about the models lately is that the more precise you have, if you have an RFP format where every single one of your vendors is operating in the same manner or it's in the same output, it's going to make it easiest. If you submit to your vendors and say, hey, these are things we're looking for, but you aren't too specific, some of them are going to give you, the kitchen sink. Some of them are going to give you a hotel brochure, and it's going to make for not as precise reporting and output in the end. So just a heads up, if you're looking at implementing tools of this nature and submitting requests to vendors or other enterprises, try to have them submit in a uniform format for your sake. Next slide. So this is another problem I tackled for a use case in working for a client where it came back to mapping in GIS data for incorrect addresses. And if you think of the scheme of thing and all the apps that we have and that we're connected to, how much actually GIS and mapping goes on is actually incredible. And this really opened my eyes to the world of GIS. I didn't have a very big knowledge base beforehand, so I was able to really dive in. We have ArcGIS at my current operation, but I found a program called OpenStreetMaps. That's basically like a Wikipedia of maps of the world that's not connected to another product at all. And through OpenStreetMaps, you can define it, tweak it, put it to your likings however you would. And this is just a case where I started prompting to try and convert latitude and longitude into a physical address, which would be called reverse geocoding or geocoding, where you're converting from one side to the other. So I started literally just prompting Gemini to create a tool within OpenStreetMaps that would provide geocoding. It pointed me into another area. Go to the next slide, please. So you have your inputs going back to the RAFT-C format of rules, actions, format, and how you want this to look. So taking a use case scenario of I need more accurate address and latitude, longitude information. So I had it find an additional API out there called Nominatum, and it is also completely open source. And so just using that information, I said, help me create an application that where if I enter latitude, longitude, it will give me a physical address, which I found one of the difficulties was when asking for addresses or when our client was trying to find addresses, that just in the world of Google and information we live in, sometimes it would want to push it to a building it would recommend or a business or an in and out or IKEA or whatever was in the area instead of the actual physical address. And so that was one of the constraints and challenges I saw in terms of making sure you have accurate data, making sure it's not hallucinating. And if you look at where this technology is headed, that the more accurate data that you can upload to yourself and not just search the web for, the happier it's going to be and the more accurate it's going to be. Next slide. So here we have basically, we already had a data flow from our team that illustrated, what happens when you enter a latitude, longitude, what happens when it's accurate, inaccurate. And so this is just another example of, I think, what you can put into when you're uploading your documentation, having data flows, Visio charts, PDFs, etc. The more precise, the better you will be off in terms of getting accurate information and getting it to a point of where, it's good to have this data flow documented for your team already. And another just takeaway I'd like you to leave with today, that if you have not documented your process and procedures for your team, but you want to get into AI, that should be the first step. You should try to spend an hour with your team, do it every other week or a week until you have it done. But that's going to help you tremendously in terms of finding efficiencies, getting to the next step, and something that will be helpful if you have, a software upgrade or you go to a new system anyway. It's just going to be helpful. So don't sleep on that. Next slide. So back to this reverse geocoding use case where I started with a Gemini prompt, and I included OpenStreetMap and all the parameters within it. I went to Nominatum, and they actually had an API key area on their website as well. Very basic, but very helpful. And literally, I just threw all that in a blender for Gemini and said, please produce an application that, will code and reverse geocode latitude, longitude into addresses and see what I can do. And lo and behold, like this is an opportunity where I don't know how, but I kind of hit a home run on the first bat. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is basically what it came up with. There was somewhat of an existing framework called GeoPulse, but it was able to modify it to my likings and to my constraints of focusing on latitude, longitude. And I gave it a quick test and just put in the Notre Dame in Paris to see what it would pull up. It pulled up the address, it pulled up the latitude, longitude, and without even asking me, it gave me a small write-up of the area, kind of a little wiki tour guide if I was interested in going there, and all in one package. So I did that probably in less than 10 minutes. Go to the next slide. All right, so those are two kind of just my distinct use cases, but I want you to think about the conversation within your department, or if you're a small to medium-sized business or large-scale government, of really, if you're interested in chipping away at things that have not been chipped away at, is just literally having the conversation and asking people if they have areas that this would benefit, or even if they have projects that maybe have been neglected for a while. My reverse geocoding project had literally been dormant for 2 years until I started to tackle it, and now it's gaining enough momentum that it will hopefully be implemented fully this year. Um, Even though we also are a paid subscriber of ArcGIS, I think the lesson learned here is that try to break the AI machines, try to see what kind of value they can provide, and try to just see how you can learn with your team where your data is going amongst your organization and what you can do with it. What kind of story can you tell with your data? That's really the ultimate goal at the end of the day. So, so if we look at, I'm gonna go back for a second. So if we look at Notebook LM, and this is a newer tool through Google and Gemini, where you can essentially upload, you know, dozens and dozens of files. You can ask it to do deep research. It's already with a Google user interface, and so it's very easy to navigate in terms of adding sources. And then the ultimate cool thing is you could take uh, the output, research, whatever, a summary. You could say, hey, Notebook LM, I want you to create a 10-week training plan on a new employee that we're taking on. We have new cybersecurity compliance. We have anything that would require detail oriented. And then you can say, Notebook LM, please make an audio podcast. And it takes a couple minutes to spool up, but it will make an audio file of your summary in a sort of two-person podcast style format. So you can learn and teach others on a variety of topics with so much ease that it's actually insane. So say you had to go to a doctor's appointment, with a family member, you know nothing about the whole situation. You can ask Notebook LM to make you an audio file for you to listen to on 12 minutes on the way over, so you're fully aware of what's going on medically. You can use it to create travel and tour advice. It will give you, if you wanted to take a 90-day trip from Antarctica to Africa and around the world, it would give you a 90-day trip of how to do that, and stopping along the way. And I think one of the coolest ways is back to, as a training tool, you can allow it to create classes for you. You can say, hey, create a 10-week training seminar because I want to learn how to teach Pilates, or I want to learn to make ravioli for my wife's birthday, or something like that. Um, so the opportunities are limitless, and it's only starting to integrate more and more. And this just happened in the past couple of weeks. There's a newer program, Anti-Gravity, that Google has just unleashed, that basically will create apps on the fly with you. Some it gets a little more technical. And if you look at sort of the workflow here, you're not just asking AI to do one thing. I think the kind of the chat GPT way of the past, you're giving it a process of decisions, or giving it a workflow that it can continually repeat, it can continually do. And once you create gems or Notebook LM notebooks, like those stay there. So you can continually modify them, and it's not just that single prompting environment. So the cool thing about it is, as you get more technical and just stuff that I've been watching, I watched a video, a guy made a Notebook LM app where he took his phone camera and it created a recipe out of everything in his fridge. And it would keep doing that as well. And that's where that machine learning part comes in, where AI is getting so good, not only will it do it once, but it will do it over and over again, and it will fix itself. And so if you ask me what would be the most valuable tool, like if you walk away from this today and get on your computer, open up Notebook LM, and just start to explore what you can upload and what it can create through deep research, and what you can create out of it. You can create learning tools, you can create flashcards, quizzes, video summaries. It will create videos for you based on your material with just a few clicks. So I think it's one of the coolest features out there, and highly encourage people to go out after our session today, spend a couple minutes, and just see where it goes from there. And also, if you have any questions or anything else, we're approaching the end of the hour, and I want to give some time to the crowd. But just think about being an AI chef. be that person in the kitchen. You're creating the recipe. You're deciding the ingredients. You're curating the output. Do I want to bake this? Do I want to boil it? Am I going to put it in an air fryer? But telling it specifically how you want these tools to perform, and they will. So just with those alone, I think you can start to supercharge your workflow and really start to look at low hanging fruit. And if you think about it from a financial reporting side, I built a tool for a client where instead of them going to a board meeting and having the board ask them questions, they just gave them the link to Notebook LM, and then their board members could ask Notebook LM questions about, quarterly performance or project annuals.
I apologize. I don't know where you're pulling information from if you have everything on the desktop.
And with that, I just want to thank everyone. Apologies for the inconvenience at the beginning. I really hope people got something out of this. If you want to contact me and have any questions or just examples of things you've discovered from Notebook LM, from